you. On behalf of the 1636 Heritage Partnership Board, welcome and thanks for participating in today's event. We are a 501c3 nonprofit for the preservation of the historic meeting house and church house of what is known as Center Church in downtown Hartford, Connecticut. For nearly 400 years, these buildings and their predecessors have been centers of civic, social, and cultural history, beginning with the very founding of Hartford since 1636. Aside from witnessing and participating in centuries of Connecticut and American history, these structures are gems of design, construction, and architecture, which must be preserved. These hold our history, these hold our heritage. To learn more about our historic record and for photos of even more of our fascinating architectural and design elements, please visit our website at 1636hp.org. And thanks to the Lyman Allyn Art Museum for facilitating this event today. We're excited to learn more about our Tiffany Studio stained glass windows. So enjoy, and I can't wait to see what we can learn today. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So our speaker today, Tanya Pohrt, is a curator at the Lyman Allyn Art Museum, where she has curated a variety of exhibitions, including the Louis Comfort Tiffany in New London Gallery, which opened in 2018. She holds a Ph.D. in American Art History from the University of Delaware and was a Marcia Brady Tucker Fellow in American Paintings and Sculpture at the Yale Art Gallery prior to coming to the Lyman Allyn. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Tanya Pohrt.
Thank you so much, Caitlin and Richard. I'm so grateful to be here today to share some images and conversation with you about a beautiful set of Tiffany windows that grace Hartford's Center Church. It is astounding to think about the deep history that these windows and the church structure and history encompass. I'm relatively new to the specifics of some of this material. So I hope today's discussion will be an introduction in some ways to the material, and this can be something to expand upon at a later point. But I'm delighted, and if folks have questions at the end or comments or clarifications, we'll see. I don't know if it'll be best to kind of do them as in the chat feature. We can perhaps sort of see as we go. But so without further ado, let's jump into looking at some pictures of these beautiful windows. So here is an image, a photo of Center Church. And as Richard Markham has already given in a lovely overview, this congregation was founded in 1636, which is a pretty astounding date. It was founded by Reverend Thomas Hooker, a prominent Puritan leader, the founder of the Connecticut colony, and a significant figure in the founding of Hartford, the founding of this church, and opening this sort of door into a giant chunk of history, which is pretty astounding. So the current church structure that we see here was built in 1807 and is the fourth such church to grace this site. The design for it is attributed to Daniel Wadsworth, based on probably design of English church structures. And there are quite a few leaded glass windows within the church, not all of which are by Tiffany. There are 15 stained glass windows in total, and 7 of these are by the firm of Heaton, Butler, and Bain, which is an English firm. And one of these windows I have here up on the screen, showing this is the Calvin and Catherine Day window, showing the angel, Mary Magdalene, the Virgin Mary at the tomb at the point at which the angel says, "He is risen, Christ is risen." And as you can see by just taking a quick glance at this window, these are more traditional windows that a lot of the detail that you see is created by enamel paint details that are painted over stained glass. And this mode of stained glass decoration really goes back to medieval times. And this basis, sort of colored glass that is made into ecclesiastical religious scenes, was used to adorn churches going back to the Middle Ages and the Renaissance in Europe. And although there are some more sophisticated examples of this traditional stained glass, more or less the basics of the kind of fundamental design and principles remained not much changed between the medieval and Renaissance era going into the late 19th century. But Tiffany, Louis Tiffany, and his firm, Tiffany Studios, did a great deal to shift and evolve the technology and the artistry of stained glass windows. And Tiffany was not alone. There were other, John Lafarge, another American competitor, did a great deal to advance some of the kind of technical, chemical glass evolution, as well as experimentation in terms of design. But the windows that we're looking at here today are the product of Tiffany Studios. So there are 5 Tiffany windows in Center Church. And the first 3 that I have up on the screen, I would categorize as fairly traditional ecclesiastical stained glass windows. So these are windows that depict religious figures, angels. On the very left, we have St. John of Patmos. In the center, we have the angel of the resurrection. And at right, we have a figure representing hope from Corinthians. Now, there are 3 other leaded glass windows in the church that, to my mind, are a little bit more experimental and more narrative and relate more closely to Hartford's history in the subjects that they depict. So we have on the left, the Thomas Hooker window. Then on the center, a window dedicated to Horace Wells, the discoverer of anesthesia. And then at right, this window is not by Tiffany Studios, but it is by a competitor, a skilled competitor, whose identity is unknown. And it is a very interesting subject that depicts the early sort of founding of the American School for the Deaf, dedicated to Mr. Gallaudet. And we'll talk about each of these windows in detail. Then there is a 6th Tiffany element within the church that maybe not everyone may recognize as being the product of Tiffany Studios, but it is this really very beautiful mosaic plaque that is dedicated to the memory of John Caldwell Parsons. And you can see here a detail of this memorial plaque that shows different colored glass tesserae. And in particular, you can see in this detail how it is this kind of crinkled gold glass that's used to differentiate the words within this plaque. And these are quite beautiful. You can see the way that the gold catches the light and reflects back and gives it a kind of glittering quality. Tiffany Studios produced a great number of mosaics, and some recent work has been done to identify more examples of these. There was a great exhibition that was held at the Corning Museum of Glass a few years ago, and an accompanying exhibition catalog that talks a lot about these ecclesiastical dedication plaques, as well as some of the more ornate glass mosaics that were used in a variety of other contexts. So it's exciting that the church has one of these, and it is a special piece. Now, I wanted to give a little sense of an overview of some material. So, as many of us maybe were not familiar with the fact that Tiffany Studios produced mosaics like these, I wanted to kind of show and talk about how there is a greater variety of work that Tiffany Studios produced for churches and also for synagogues as well. And you can see this is a historical photograph taken from Tiffany Studios archives, showing some of the designers working within the ecclesiastical department. And you can see they have some completed or maybe partially completed windows behind the two figures working there. And then on the right-hand side, there is a to scale sort of cartoon drawing that would show the placement of individual pieces of glass. And this type of scale drawing would be made for each individual window that Tiffany Studios produced. Maybe I'll stay on this for a moment. So this interest in Tiffany Studios and other really elaborate decoration accompanied a boom in church building and decoration that came in the decades after the American Civil War. So there was really a strong growth in terms of the economics in America and of during Reconstruction and that era, the last quarter of the 19th century, and then into the 20th century, there was a sharp increase in the number of churches that were constructed. And this coincided with Tiffany's exploration and experimentation in glass, giving the firm this perfect avenue for creating, commissioning, producing very beautiful art to decorate these churches. So it was in 1889 that Louis Comfort Tiffany established this department within his larger firm to focus on ecclesiastical commissions. And although this work may not be as well known, there are Tiffany windows in churches all across America, hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands almost, of Tiffany windows out there. So the firm was really prolific, and it grew over time to cater to the needs of many religious communities. And here is an example of a Tiffany window in New London, Connecticut. This window is dedicated to Lyman Allyn, the founder of, or the namesake of the Lyman Allyn Art Museum. And this window is extant still in St. James Episcopal Church in downtown New London. But you can see at the very bottom in the center, this window is dedicated to the memory of Lyman Allyn. And the way that these windows came about is that often wealthy families, established prominent families within a community would commission these stained glass windows to commemorate the deceased, to commemorate important members of their family, and also to beautify their places of worship. And it's interesting, these sponsors of Tiffany windows are very often prominent members within the community who are doing a variety of other good works, who are founding libraries, museums, hospitals. The names that come up in these windows often tend to be ones that you see in different places throughout regional communities. So I think this is the case in Hartford, certainly, and in New London, elsewhere in Connecticut as well. Here at the Lyman Allyn, we have a drawing for an alms basin that was commissioned by someone who lived in New London for a church in North Carolina as part of a larger decorative commission. And I don't think, unfortunately, that the alms basin is extant, but the drawing is, and it gives a really nice example of the work, the design work that went into both the windows and the other associated sacred objects that Tiffany Studios might produce. And some of these drawings have notations on them that document this process of discussion that happened between the designers at Tiffany Studios and the patrons who were paying for, who were commissioning these objects for their churches. So sometimes designs would be modified, materials would be changed, etc. This is another nice historical photo that shows the glass shop at Tiffany Studios. And you can see just how many workers there are within this space. And it gives a sense of how busy and how prolific Tiffany Studios was in this era, after 1889 into the 1920s and up until the dissolution of Tiffany Studios following Louis Comfort Tiffany's death. Here we have a detail of a window that's in the Lyman Allyn, St. Cecilia. This was commissioned for a mausoleum in New London. And it just gives a detailed view of one of these windows that the workers within Tiffany Studios would be putting together. Now, some of the photos here, this photo here shows men working in the glass shop. But Tiffany directed the efforts of many designers. And in 1892, he began hiring women designers to assist with the work on a variety of different materials and projects. And they were hired after a strike in the all-male glass cutters and glaziers union. But the work that they performed was so exceptional that the ranks of women employees quickly grew. And some of you may be familiar with one of Tiffany Studios' designers, Clara Driscoll, who's had a fair amount of research and interest in her work fairly recently. And we can see at left a view of Clara working with an object. And in this larger group photo at right, she is the leftmost standing figure. And she is accompanied by another of other women designers and glass cutters at Tiffany Studios. And here is an example. She is best known for her work in stained glass lamp design. So this daffodil lamp was her first documented work designing a floral leaded glass lamp. Now, just to give a sort of situate you and explain my reason for coming to this material, here we have an image of our museum in New London, Connecticut. And this is a view of our gallery, Louis Comfort Tiffany in New London. And when we put this gallery together, it was with this leaded glass window kind of at its center. And this window comes from a church in New London, the All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. And the church was expanding and needed to sell the building to move into a larger space, but had to sell the window to make that move possible. And it was really a fantastic opportunity for the Lyman Allyn to purchase this window at a reasonable rate. And as part of that purchase, we made a commitment to make this window available to the community, to anyone for forever. So we have it in a permanent gallery focusing on this window and other windows. And then we've created an exhibition around this that talks about the breadth of Louis Comfort Tiffany's career and interests. And it also traces some of the Tiffany family's specific history within Connecticut that relates to our collection and our story. And to give a brief overview of this, it's a history that not everybody knows. So Louis Comfort Tiffany's grandfather came from Connecticut. And above here is the house where Comfort Tiffany raised his children. And Louis's father, Charles, grew up in this house in East Brooklyn, Connecticut. And Comfort Tiffany ran a textile mill, cotton mill in the area around Plainfield. And this is an old, a view of one of the cotton mills that was affiliated with the Tiffanys. But Charles Louis Tiffany in 1837 left Connecticut to establish a firm that we now know as Tiffany and Company, the luxury firm that began producing jewelry, silver, and other luxury goods. And Charles began with a partner who was also from Connecticut. And they quickly grew this firm, to become what it is today. And a tremendously powerful and influential firm. We have a few historical photographs here. This is Louis at right with his sister Annie as a boy, and their parents, Charles and Harriet Tiffany. So the Tiffany family moved to New York City to work at Tiffany and Company to build the business, but all of their relatives lived back in Connecticut. So the family would return to Connecticut during the summers, over the holidays, and they thought of this really as their home away from home, and would visit relatives in the region of Killingly, as well as New London and Norwich. And as Louis grew up and his sister grew up, they both married spouses who came from Connecticut, from Norwich. Here we have Louis at center, and at the left, his first wife, Mary Woodbridge Goddard from Norwich, who coincidentally was a close childhood friend of his sister's. And his sister, Annie, married a man named Alfred Mitchell, and they acquired a home in New London, Connecticut. And it is the land, their estate is now Mitchell College. This is a great historic photograph of Alfred Mitchell with his two daughters and Louis's daughter playing on the beach in New London, Connecticut. So Louis often visited and spent a great deal of time in New London with his sister. And while he was building his own career at the same time. So his father ran the silver and jewelry firm, Tiffany and Company, but Louis had his own interests and artistic ideas and began his career as a painter. And he had a life, what he described as a lifelong quest for beauty. And this work that he did, he was very inspired by forms in nature and by art from around the world, and also by art in history, looking back to Roman art, to Byzantine art. He drew a great deal of inspiration, Egyptian art, and really brought all of these designs into the work that he did at Tiffany Studios. So this is just a quick overview of our gallery. And just to point out another Hartford connection, we have the Mark Twain House in Hartford, which I hope most of you have seen. It is a rare and special place, one of the few surviving structures that was designed by Tiffany and associated artists. So Louis began his career as a painter, then he shifted gears slightly and worked as an interior designer along with several other talented designers. And as this group of four worked on a range of very prominent architectural interior design projects, one of which was the Mark Twain House. They also designed a number of very fashionable interiors in New York City for the Vanderbilts, for the Havemeyers. Tiffany and associated artists helped design part of the White House for Chester Arthur. But many of the interiors have been subsequently destroyed, renovated. The buildings no longer exist. So the Mark Twain House is a great example where you can see on the right here, there is original woodwork, and there are a range of fascinating details that were added, stencil design and so forth by Tiffany, as well as by his colleagues, Candace Wheeler, Lockwood DeForest, Samuel Coleman. So it was while he was working as an interior designer that Tiffany first began to experiment with glass. And he began by producing these fairly simple glass tiles. On the left, there are two that we have in the Lyman Allyn's collection. And at right, you can see in the Mark Twain House, one of the fireplace surrounds that contains glass that Louis produced. But at that point, he didn't have his own glass blowing house or studio. And it was difficult to do that kind of work without adequate space and materials. But we can see over time, Tiffany built a series of glass houses, several of which perished in fires, but established space in Corona, Queens that he dedicated to glass experimentation. And he didn't do this work alone, of course. He hired prominent glassmakers. A man named John Nash was one of those figures who had a pivotal role at Tiffany Studios. But he designed really amazing things, like on the right here, this is known as a Cypriot vase, where his firm was able to duplicate and replicate the look of ancient glass, ancient Roman glass that had been buried for centuries, with this kind of irregular, iridescent finish. And as Tiffany's designers began blowing making glass vessels in addition to producing leaded glass windows. These were for sale commercially through Tiffany Studios, as well as through his father's firm, Tiffany and Company. And this glass is known as Fabrial Glass, much of which has this beautiful iridescent finish to it. And these are just several examples from our collection, as well as some of the lamps. And Tiffany and his designers worked in a whole range of materials, including enamel and metalware, jewelry. But the emphasis and our interest today is mostly in the windows. So this is an image you've seen briefly of this kind of core piece from our collection, the Come Unto Me window. We have two other windows that come from the Frank Loomis Palmer Mausoleum in New London. And we'll talk more about those. But shifting back to our primary interest today in the center church windows. Moving roughly chronologically, we have this window showing St. John on the Isle of Patmos. That is a signed example, signed Tiffany Glass and Decorating Company from 1894. And just to sort of share, Tiffany Studios is the kind of blanket term that's used and is the later name of Tiffany's firm. But there were several earlier iterations where the name was different. So sometimes the signature and which firm is attributed to a specific piece helps date windows, because we know when those firms were in business. And Tiffany Glass and Decorating Company is one of the earlier firms. But interestingly, while this example is signed, some of the Tiffany windows that are known to be excellent, amazing Tiffany windows are not signed. So there isn't really a universal explanation for why this is the case. It may be that particular patrons requested a signature, or some of the designers or installers tended to sign the pieces, whereas others didn't. But whether a piece lacks a signature doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't a Tiffany window. So it's a difficult thing sometimes to determine, but this is indeed known to be and is a signed piece that is Tiffany. And you can see just the beautiful variation in color here and texture. This is what makes Tiffany windows really so exceptionally beautiful and valued. They were considerably more expensive than any other firm that was producing windows in this era. But it was because their work was exceptional. Other firms were emerged or developed that copied some of Tiffany Studios' designs and approaches. But many of them, there are ways that you can tell when a work is not by Tiffany Studios. And there are some specialty types of glass that are unique to Tiffany Studios. This second window here, the John Caldwell Memorial Window, shows the Resurrection Angel from 1894. This was designed by Edward Sperry for Tiffany Glass and Decorating Company, and was a gift of Caldwell's grandson, John Caldwell Parsons. And John Caldwell Parsons is the individual to whom the mosaic plaque was dedicated. So the Caldwell family, Parsons family, funded both this window and later the memorial plaque. this is an extremely beautiful window, a window that I think many love because of the appeal of this angel and the beauty of the glass. Oh, right there. Now it's interesting, there are other examples of similar resurrection angels. And I think it's because this subject is so beautifully done and so popular that several different churches requested it to decorate their spaces. And on the left, we have, this is a window that is currently in the collection of the Worcester Art Museum. But it was originally commissioned for Boston's Mount Vernon Congregational Church. And you can see, that it is probably the exact same sort of to-scale cartoon figure, the outline, the drawing of the angel is likely the same, but the painting is a bit different and the scale is different as well. So the space that was available in what is now the Worcester window is more narrow. So you can see that the angel, only part of her wings are shown here, not the full beautiful spread of them. This is a photograph that I took, not a great photo, in Worcester. And sadly, when these windows were being taken down from the church, one of them, the one with the signature at right, was stolen. So now there are only 2 windows that remain. But you can see originally it would have been the angel at center and then 2 of these beautiful landscapes with lilies flanking her on either side. Now, there are other examples of this resurrection angel in Connecticut churches. So left, there is Christ Church in Greenwich, a very similar figure. In the center, an example from Christ Episcopal Church in Stratford. And you can see that the body is similar here, but the face of this individual angel is quite different and looks almost like a portrait to me. And then at right, a slightly different design for St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Manchester, Connecticut. So it seems likely to me that maybe some people saw this beautiful window here in Hartford and requested for it as a subject for other windows. And there is actually an earlier precedent. A version of this window was installed in Chicago at the Columbian Exposition of 1893. And so that may be where it began to sort of enter into circulation. And you can see in detailed photos of this, one of the specific Tiffany Studios innovations in glass is demonstrated in this window. The feather glass that was created has the ripples and the look of individual feathers, which is just stunningly beautiful. And there's another angel window at right from New London, from the Pequot Chapel, that just shows another example of an angel with the feathers. But I think that the Hartford window here has a more delicate translation of the feathers. You can really see that sort of center spire and the pattern of the feathers going out on either side. Next, we have the Brian Edward Hooker Memorial Window, depicting the figure of Hope from 1899. And you can see this is a signed window. And there's a little bit of text often on these with an inscription, a biblical quote. And here the text in memoriam, Brian Edward Hooker, deacon of this church, 1852 to 1874. Behind the figure of hope, you can see beautiful grapevines. And this was a theme that Louis Comfort Tiffany and his designers loved and repeated many times. Just for comparison, at left are the two angel windows from the Pequot Chapel in New London, compared to the Hooker Memorial Window showing hope at right. And you can see there is a more structured lattice behind the figure of hope that gives a sort of visual organization to the composition, whereas the grapevines are a little looser at left. Here is another image of a secular window, a Grape Arbor window, that is in the collection of the Morse Museum in Florida, which is a fantastic collection that is everything Tiffany is in the collection of the Morse Museum. So it's a great resource. Their website is fantastic. And if you can visit in person, it's incredible. Now, shifting to the more historic windows, we have the Thomas Hooker Memorial Window from 1900. Pastor of the church, 1633 to 1647. And of course, his story is transplanting this group of dissenting Puritans that had come from Massachusetts after spending 3 years there in the Massachusetts colony, and breaking away to form their own community in Hartford, Connecticut. And this is this important moment in history that's being documented. And I wanted to point out that this depiction of history of a portrait within a window in a stained glass Tiffany window in a church is relatively unusual. It is much more common for families to commission strictly biblical scenes. So here at right, this is the Lawrence Memorial Window from New London, from St. James Episcopal Church. And often what families would do is illustrate a namesake. So there was a Sebastian Lawrence, Joseph Lawrence, and have a kind of oblique connection to one's family by showing a figure within the Bible that relates to a family story. But here, in the instance of Center Church, Thomas Hooker plays such a foundational role in the church, in the community, that I think it certainly makes sense to have this window that imagines what he would have looked like. There are not any portraits of him that exist, but I think after looking at this window, that perhaps the designers at Tiffany Studios were familiar with this statue by Augustus St. Gaudens. That was a portrait of Samuel Chapin, another early colonial founding figure, a founder of Springfield, Massachusetts, who is commemorated in this statue from 1883 to 86. So this statue would be something that would be familiar. It predates the Hooker window. And you can see just the pose of the figure, the way the cloak falls off his form, and some of the details of his dress really are very similar to this figure of the Puritan. And I think there was certainly, I would imagine, some influence that can be seen there. And it's interesting, so the Hooker family that commissions this window is looking back to their ancestors and really cementing their role as sort of living in this lineage of being founders of their community. And the same thing is happening with the Chapin family in Springfield. And this is occurring within this moment of the colonial revival, the last quarter of the 19th century and into the 20th century was a moment when Americans were really fascinated with their own history. And the Centennial Exposition, World's Fair, occurred in Philadelphia in 1876, and that spurred an interest in the arts, in the decorative arts. And of course, this was happening in literature and history, in really looking back at the colonial era and celebrating and documenting that history there, which is happening in the church. And we can see that there are other images of some of these figures, a statue of Thomas Hooker, not far away in Hartford, that was created by a woman sculptor, Frances Lawton Wadsworth. Then I realize we're running short on time, so I have to talk a little quicker. We have still 2 more windows to talk about. This is really a fantastic and beautiful window. Mercy and Truth, Righteousness and Peace. This window from 1903 is known to be designed by Frederick Wilson, who was a prominent ecclesiastical designer at Tiffany Studios. And this commemorates the history of Horace Wells, one of the discoverers of anesthesia. He was a Hartford dentist and a member of the church, and in a long story, was sort of partially the figure who realized the potential of nitrous oxide, and then later experimented with ether and with other gases to be able to perform dental surgery on his patients without pain, which is a tremendous discovery. Here there is a bronze statue of him that exists in Bushnell Park. And there is a portrait of him, but you can see this is an allegorical window dedicated to, with these figures of mercy, truth, righteousness, and peace. And I think in this instance, these 2 figures in the window are righteousness and peace. And we can see that in part because the figure of peace kneeling holds the dove, which is a traditional symbol of peace. But it's interesting, Frederick Wilson, the designer of this window, was British, was English, and was very influenced by the British pre-Raphaelite artists. So many of his designs incorporate elements that I think build on pre-Raphaelite art in England. And many of his figures are redheads, which some of the pre-Raphaelite artists had favored red-haired models. This at right here is a painting that I think is no longer extant by Evelyn De Morgan, who was a female artist, member of the pre-Raphaelites, showing the same subject from the Psalms. Mercy and truth have met, righteousness and peace have kissed each other. And you can see the dove at the lower left there with peace and righteousness that are often shown kissing because that is the biblical quote. And here you can see the figure of the dove is elevated slightly above the plane of the rest of this window. And this illustrates one of the aspects of Tiffany windows that make them so refined, is the use of plating, taking multiple layers of glass and plating one on top of another to create subtleties in terms of design and decoration, deeper color in many instances. So a lot of the plates would probably be on the back side, but in some instances, some details are added on the front side as well. So you can see the dove here is a front layer that's added on. And this is just to point out a similarity here. Our Come Unto Me window at the Lyman Allyn is also designed by Frederick Wilson. And you can see this red-headed Christ here has that pre-Raphaelite influence. This detail here of the window of righteousness and peace, you can get a sense of the subtlety that is given to this glass with the plating. You can see the chainmail here on the figure of righteousness. That is created with a layer, I think, of a kind of orangey pink glass on top of the leading or the metal work, that creates the links in the chainmail. Another interesting detail to note is up above the torch, you can see these very ethereal sort of wisps of smoke beyond the figures on either side. And I wonder if these might be references to anesthesia, to ether. And it's interesting to compare this. There is a memorial that is dedicated to Horace Wells, where he's been reburied in Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hartford. And you can see there's a figure here, and then this allegorical figure showing anesthesia with this similar kind of billowing cloud of ether that is providing respite for the ill and the injured, as a metaphor sort of for this painless surgery. Now, we're at the end, but I just wanted to very quickly mention this mystery window, the Cogswell Window, showing Jesus healing the disabled from 1887 by an unknown maker. And this is dedicated to the Reverend Thomas Gallaudet, the founder of the Deaf Mute Institute in America. And this much larger, very interesting history of Hartford as this center for very interesting progressive studies into educating the deaf. And there are elements of this window that are clumsier in some ways technically and compositionally. And I think that there have been some controversies about the window within the church community over time as well. But it is certainly food for thought to think about this and the history, this sort of Hartford specific history that's being referenced. Supposedly in the background, the figure of the house was the Cogswell house. And it was Alice Cogswell, the figure's daughter, who was one of the original, was deaf and mute, and sort of spurred this desire for better education. I think we are very low on time, so I should wrap this up and open up to questions. But to say, that some of this is just early research, and that hopefully thinking about these windows can continue. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to look at them today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. So if you could unshare your screen. We're just shy of 100 people today. So I think what might be the best way to do Q&A is if anyone has any questions, to write their question in the chat option. And to get to the chat, you go to More, which is the 3 little dots at the top of your screen, and you can hit More and hit Chat. And you can submit your questions that way. I think that just might be the easiest way to answer all of these questions. Tanya, can you see the chat?
I can.
Okay, good, because unfortunately my screen is frozen, so I can't.
Yeah, at least I can see some of them. And interestingly, someone asked about the angel's facial details. I imagine we mean the angel of the resurrection, and that's an important point to make. So Tiffany's goal was to use the glass itself as much as possible to tell elements of a composition and story and to show texture and shape. But the faces and the hands of figures were still painted by and large. So they would use enamel paint that would be then fired to create those fine details. But the rest of the windows, by and large, were created using only the different varieties of glass and the leading. And let's see, sorry. There's another question, where were the factories located for the Glassworks? They were in Corona, Queens, was where the factories were. There's some great details. A few people are giving more information, which is very helpful. Wow. Let's see. Oh, one question was whether the different versions of the Angel of the Resurrection windows, were they all by Tiffany? And they were, the examples that I showed. And I wanted to share, there is a really helpful resource out there, a website that is known as the Tiffany Window Census. And it is, the website is Cambridge2000, I think, .com. But it's just a kind of consortium of a lot of images of windows. And it's organized geographically, so you can look at a particular city and see within that, or state, where there are documented Tiffany windows located. And then you can also, in some cases, click on different subjects and see where there are windows. So for the Angel of the Resurrection, it was a really useful tool for looking at those. Let's see. I mean, maybe if anyone else has a question, it's tricky to read through these all, and I think maybe someone could unmute themselves. I know, Caitlin, you just said not to do that.
No,
I miss the kind of
they can if they
interactive
want
quality
to.
of talking to people.
My screen is frozen, so I
Oh,
can't.
okay.
I can't help guide people to answering
Right.
questions.
Tanya, this is David Bickman. I want to thank you for this.
Thank you.
I just want to mention that in the photograph of the ecclesiastical department, it showed the parable of the sower in cartoon form. That
Great.
is mosaic. It's an Emmanuel Congregational Church in Hartford, about 2 miles on Farmington Avenue from Center Church, directly across the street.
Fantastic.
Mark Twain, Harry Peacher Stowe house.
Wow.
And it was put in there in the early 30s in the memory, I think, of the name of somebody by the name of Jarvis, I think.
Wow. Thank you. That's fantastic.
Looks like it's also been in other places as a stained glass, the same
Right.
motif.
Yeah.
But
What a great connection to make, though. Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts now? If anyone wants to unmute themselves.
I guess I was asking or thinking then, with the Emmanuel Church sower mosaic, are you saying, or is it being said that that was a Tiffany mosaic?
Yes, it was, yes, commissioned by the Tiffany's. And so they did that, yes.
Oh,
And I didn't know, I just was going on the internet, and it looks like there's the same motif was being done in stained glass in at least 2 or 3 other churches around the Northeast and in the East.
thank you.
It was identical. When I looked at the photograph, it's identical. In fact, you can go online and you can look up Emmanuel Congregational Church, and it's right over the altar. So it's kind of the centerpiece in the church as you walk in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fantastic. There are a lot of treasures in Connecticut And I encourage you all to do research and to see these in person. I think, you know, it really is a much different experience to be able to interact with them and see the details. I didn't quite have time to talk about some of the other specialty glass, but when you are in front of a window, you can see some of them have ripples to show drapery on the figures, their clothing, and subtleties. There's sort of confetti glass that Tiffany Studios produced within these larger compositions, showing trees often in foliage, where there are little bits of glass that are different colors mixed in with the molten glass to give this really subtle variated effect in terms of light. And it's great to see those in person.
Tanya, I'm Shelley Stackhouse. I'm the pastor at Center Church, and thank you so much. This has been amazing. I want to clarify for everybody, we would love to have you all come to Center Church and look at these windows. However, until the pandemic passes, our building is closed. And so we're going to ask you to wait. And as soon as we open up again, we are going to throw one heck of a party. So
thank you for clarifying that. Yes, yes. No, that's important. We don't want everyone showing up at your door right now. The Lyman Allyn is open with, you know, we do have limited numbers, but we don't require advance reservation, and it's been very quiet recently. And we do have extra COVID cleaning measures, masks required. But if any of you are in the region, we would love a visit. But thank you. This has been such a treat, and the church has these tremendous treasures, and it's delightful to begin to explore them and think about all the history that they contain. I think that this recording will be saved, recorded, and then made available for anyone who wasn't able to make it today or wants to.
Or for those who joined late. You can contact me, Caitlin Healy, Director of Education at Healy, Healy, at lymanallyn.org. You can also find my email on our website, www.lymanallyn.org. So if there are any other questions, anyone else, Tanya, has anyone written one in? I still can't see it, unfortunately.
There are a few, but maybe I'll follow up with some individuals.
We have about 4 minutes left. So,
oh, okay.
So if
Great.
you want, for those of you who have places to be or things to do, feel free to exit out. But for those who have a couple more minutes to listen to these questions, feel free to stay.
Right. There's a comment here from Julie Sloan saying this window is by Frederick Crowninshield, discussed in my book, Frederick Crowninshield, A Renaissance Man in a Gilded Age. Is this the mystery window that you're referring to? That you must know much more than I do about. Could you tell us,
it
please?
is.
And I apologize for not knowing this, but thank you.
Yeah, the Gallaudet Window is by Frederick Crowninshield. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank
he
you.
He was a New York and Boston stained glass artist working at the same time as Tiffany.
Great. That's fantastic. Well, I would love to get more details to read your book. And I apologize for missing that. So I'm so grateful that you're here and that you're sharing your research with us. So
Sure.
thank you.
Happy to.
Great.
I have a quick
Exciting.
question. One of the windows had a notation from 1898 about patent or trademark. Are there many examples of Tiffany doing that?
Yes, there are various points where, you know, some specific glass processes were patented. His opalescent glass was a patent for that built on a slightly earlier similar patent that had been taken out by John Lafarge. But I don't know that all of the windows that are signed have that necessarily. And that's a good question to think about. I mean, it must have been submitted to the patent office, that specific design. But I don't know if, my guess is maybe, you know, there was something specific to that commission where that was thought to be important. But that wasn't always the case. I don't know, though. That's a good question. We'll have to think about that in more detail. I'm not sure. But I think it is a concern, and particularly because there are other competing firms that had cheaper windows that they were producing. You know, it was difficult for Tiffany Studios to have kind of knockoff versions of some of their designs that were out there and made available. The River of Life window that we have at the Lyman Allyn was thought at one point to be Tiffany Studios, but when Thomas Venturella, our window conservator, came and did work on it, he said, no, it is likely the work of a competing firm, Lamb Studios. And after he talked about it, I could see the differences. But, you know, I think that it's partly why there is a lot of confusion out there about some windows, you know, that are Tiffany or aren't Tiffany. It can be difficult to know. Anyone else? Great.
Yeah, hello?
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah, hi. I was wondering if you know, are there any Catholic churches or cathedrals that have Tiffany windows, like the St. Patrick Cathedral in New York or such, you know? These.
There are, although I'm having trouble thinking of a specific example, but I think that there were so many, there were quite a few commissions, you know, made through various, you know, various faiths, including synagogues, Jewish synagogues as well,
Yeah.
where designs would be modified to, you know, to suit different interests and religious beliefs. And there was an interesting catalog and an exhibition that was produced of Tiffany's ecclesiastical work that looks into a number of examples of some of these.
Okay.
But, you know, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Anyone else?
Dr. Pohrt?
Yes.
Am I correct in remembering that Tiffany went to his grave with the secret of how he made his amazing glass? Is that correct?
Well, there were trade secrets that, you know, Tiffany did a lot of experimentation early in his career, and then Arthur Nash and other chemical developers worked with him and did a lot of the work, you know, trying to kind of develop these specific formulas. And some of those formulas exist. There's a series of Nash notebooks out there, but a fair amount of kind of mystery about some of the technical details. And my interest has been more kind of in the art historical end and less in the technical, you know, the kind of chemical makeup of the glass. So I haven't looked into, you know, some of those specific details as much as I could, but I feel like that sort of has the sound of being maybe one of these myths a bit, you know, that that are out there. Tiffany really experimented in a lot of different materials and media. And as time went on, you know, he sort of stepped back from some of the day-to-day design and production of the windows. and shifted interest to, he designed some jewelry. He was really, very broad in terms of his artistic interests. And he continued to paint and to sketch throughout his entire career as well. So there's really a pretty amazing breadth in terms of the materials and the work that he did.
Wow.
So
Wow.
great. Well, thank you all so much for coming. And if anyone, wants to continue a conversation or have follow-up questions, my email is my last name, Pohrt @lymanallyn.org. And that contact is available on our website, as well as my phone number. So if anyone has any further thoughts, I'd be happy to continue the conversation at another time. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a great rest of your day. For those of you who enjoyed this, we have another lecture on Wednesday. Richard Gibstein is giving a lecture on New London architecture that should be really, really fascinating. And the registration link is again on our website. For those of you, once again, who would like the recording, please email me. My email, Caitlin Healy, is on the website, and we'll send you the recording. We should have it by tomorrow. Thank you so much again, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we hope to see you at the Lyman Allyn